All right, kicking off the wide receiver rankings at the very top is actually a growing tier 1 than what it was before the season started, with 6 players who are doing absolutely insane things right now. Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Nico Collins, and AJ Brown. I really don't think I need to explain why any of these players are in tier 1 outside of AJ Brown. Everybody else is 25 or younger. They've all had insane fantasy seasons already and are all basically pacing to do it again this year because they're all top 10 in points per game right now. When I talk about having an absolute stud wide receiver on your team, guys that will legitimately win you weeks and win you your fantasy championship, especially if you're lucky enough to have multiples of these guys, these are the players that every true contender needs to have on their rosters. So I don't think anyone really has a problem with these 6 being in tier 1. I think the main problem is I didn't include everyone that you think should be in that tier and make it an even bigger tier. Well, that's where I think tier 2 comes in, or perhaps more aptly named tier 1B, basically Malik Nabers, Puka Nacua, and Rashee Rice. I have to be honest, I am splitting the absolute finest of hairs because these 3 are fantastic and I want to so badly put them in tier 1, but something is stopping me with each one of these guys. I'm going to work my way backwards on this one because I think it's just quicker to go through the back end guys before we get to the big name, but Rashee Rice is fantastic. He is just hurt and recovering from a torn ACL, and then maybe he gets suspended next year, and I'm going to tell you right now, none of that matters to me for Dynasty. Cooper Kupp tore his ACL in year 2 at age 25 and came back the next year and put up 95 for 1150 and 10 as the fantasy wide receiver 4. Keenan Allen also tore his ACL in year 4 and came back the next year and put up 100 for 1406 as the fantasy wide receiver 3. I am not scared of the ACL injury. I'm also not scared of a suspension. In fact, I could make the argument that could be slightly helpful because it would allow Rashee Rice to get even healthier by forcing him to sit another 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it is. Rashee Rice is a very easy top 10 Dynasty wide receiver, and to suggest otherwise, I think is absolutely asinine. As for Puka, I think he would be in tier 1 had he had all been healthy this year. He put up one of the best rookie seasons of all time, and in his extremely limited 90 snaps played this year, he has looked basically the exact same as he did last year. The only question is, what happens post Matthew Stafford? Does he get Larry Fitzgeralded with absolutely atrocious quarterback play, or is it good enough to still make him elite? That's really the only question and the only thing holding me back from putting Puka in tier 1 today, right now. And then, of course, the big one, Malik Nabers, the Dynasty wide receiver 3 on Keep Trade Cut, but my wide receiver 7. And let me put this plainly, I am not low on Malik Nabers, okay? I think that he is tremendous. I think that he can be a top 10 or even top 5 fantasy wide receiver annually for like the next 7, 8, 9 years. The problem that I have is 100% the quarterback. And I know that you're going to say that that wasn't an issue early in the season. And I agree, it was not an issue early in the year until it became an issue. The past 3 weeks for Malik Nabers have been really, really rough. He's still been hyper-targeted, which is great. He's catching a ton of passes. He's just not really able to do much more than that because Daniel Jones and this offense are just so bad. He hasn't scored since week 3. He hasn't been over 75 yards in a game since week 4. It is not a Malik Nabers problem. It is an offense problem. And as of this moment, I cannot sit here and say that I believe that Malik Nabers currently possesses the hammer ability that the other 6 receivers ahead of him currently do. None of them have quarterback and offense issues. It's part of the reason why they're so phenomenal and why they're so consistent on a weekly basis. Nabers does not have that right now and may not for another year or 2. Yes, the NFL moves very quickly. Situations can change very rapidly. And if the Giants draft the next CJ Stroud or the next Justin Herbert, then all is forgotten. But until that happens, I cannot put Malik Nabers in tier 1. But getting into tier 3 now, this tier is essentially more young wide receivers who have a ton of upside but need to just kind of put everything together still. Marvin Harrison Jr., Brian Thomas Jr., Garrett Wilson, Drake London, and DK Metcalf. Marvin Harrison and BTJ have both been pretty good to start the year as rookies, and I don't know if people realize this, but statistically, they're not really that different. They've both scored 5 touchdowns. They've seen basically the same number of targets, except BTJ has caught 7 more of those targets for 150 more yards, leading to better consistency and a couple more big games. But at the end of the day, it is still Marvin Harrison Jr. He is still attached to Kyler Murray, and hopefully this offense just gets better. Same thing goes for BTJ. He's attached to Trevor Lawrence, which I still think is a positive. It's just we're hoping that that offense also improves. Garrett Wilson feels like the one guy on this list who probably should be higher, especially since he's been amazing for the past month or so, but he's 2 years older than Marvin Harrison and Brian Thomas Jr., and his quarterback play might change negatively for him if Aaron Rodgers were to move on or New York as a whole just kind of blows everything up. He is still very immensely talented. He has proven that much so far through 3 years and producing very well right now, but I think it's hard to really put him any higher than this. Drake London then is in a very similar boat. His quarterback situation is kind of slightly better in terms of at least longevity with Kirk Cousins than Aaron Rodgers, but I don't think that Cousins is dramatically better than Aaron Rodgers currently on a talent level. Also, London himself is not producing as well as Wilson, and outside of really just one big game, is more of a top 30 wide receiver on a point per game basis every other week, which feels even scarier considering that a lot of his production this year is from touchdowns. But he's still 23, he's got a good quarterback, good offense, and a plenty of time to continue breaking out. And then DK Metcalf is the real veteran of this tier at almost 27 years old. He's been a top 15 guy basically every year he's been in the league. He's a top 15 guy basically right now when he's healthy, and that's pretty much that. He's an elite wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 upside. Tier 4 is now the longest tier in this entire top 30 because every single player in this tier feels like the same person, probably because for the most part, they're all wide receiver 2s on their own teams, and because of that, their weekly volume is inconsistent, so their production is inconsistent. So for you, the fantasy manager starting these guys, you never really know which version of these wide receivers you're getting on any given week. So my order for this tier goes Chris Olave, Jaden Reed, George Pickens, Devonta Smith, Zay Flowers, Jalen Waddle, and T. Higgins. Again, this is all one big, massive tier. So however you guys personally order these players, I have zero issue with that. I do think that having Olave and Reed at the top of this tier is the right move, and I think it's the right move consensus-wise as well, as I think they have the best ability to break out of this kind of wide receiver 2 tier. Even if they themselves aren't the wide receiver 2s on their own team, they kind of play like it, especially Olave. I mean, he's a little bit scary now too after his back-to-back concussions, but assuming all of that goes well, he should be fine for Dynasty. George Pickens is next on the list as he also is the wide receiver 1 on his team, but he also doesn't really produce like it. I mean, he kind of sort of does, but then because of the offense and the quarterback inconsistencies too, the upside is super, super high for George Pickens, but the floor is still really low. So this is kind of where he falls, at least in terms of Dynasty rankings. Then as for Smith, Flowers, Waddle, and Higgins, all are basically wide receiver 2s in my opinion. Flowers is kind of starting to break out of it, but the offense is still really run heavy, and his floor is also really low in games that the Ravens just demolish their opponents on the ground. The other 3, though, are 100% without a doubt wide receiver 2s on their own team, and it would take a legitimate situation change to break them out of that mold. I do really like everybody in this tier, but the weekly inconsistencies mean that they really can't go much higher without something positive happening for them. But they've all shown that they can produce extremely well, that we really can't also have them any lower than this either. Now into tier 5, it is just 4 really young guys who have all flashed in their career very early on, but again, it is just more inconsistencies with usage and volume and production that there is a ton of future upside, but something has to change for them situationally. I'm talking Rome Odunze, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Tank Dell, and Ladd McConkey. None of these guys are the wide receiver 1 on their own teams. I mean, maybe technically Ladd McConkey is, but like the Ravens, LA is just such a low volume team right now. Quentin Johnson is also producing decently that I don't see how McConkey breaks out with how the offense is run currently. So that's really the hurdle that he needs to get over. The other 3, though, they're all basically in the same situation. They are all waiting for someone else to leave so that they can step into a bigger role. Odunze needs Keenan Allen to leave, JSN needs Tyler Lockett to leave, and Tank Dell needed Stephon Diggs to leave, which he is kind of now because he's out for the year with a torn ACL, but could also be re-signed at the end of the year. Who really knows what that situation holds in the future? But regardless, all of these guys are not really win-now pieces. They are fun wide receiver 3s, probably better as wide receiver 4s if you're competing, but they need something to change around them, which is really annoying because all 4 of them are very, very talented. And also, yes, I am basically taking an L on Ladd McConkey, but love all four of these guys. Love seeing Ladd McConkey also break out as well into the top 25. And to close out the top 30 with tier 6, I just have all of the older producers. Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore, and then Brandon Ayuk and Chris Godwin are appended into this group as productive players when they are healthy. And yes, I do believe Brandon Ayuk will return to production when he gets healthy. He was a top 15 guy in 2022, top 15 in 2023, and I am not holding a bad half a season of 2024 completely against him for Dynasty. He's also the youngest of this entire group, so that also helps too. Definitely deserves to be a top 30 wide receiver still. Now, Tyreek Hill is the one guy that I think people were probably shocked to see him so low, but he's wide receiver 21 on KTC right now, so having him at wide receiver 26 doesn't really feel too off. If his name was not Tyreek Hill, and we just looked at what he's done this year at age 30, almost 31, he would be lower than wide receiver 21. But because of the offensive circumstances of playing without Tua for most of the year, and because it's still Tyreek Hill, we give him a little bit of leniency. But also, if you look at the rest of the older wide receivers, Cooper Kupp is less than a year older than Tyreek. He's wide receiver 35 on Keep Trade Cut. Mike Evans, just a few months older than Tyreek, wide receiver 37 on KTC. Devontae Adams is wide receiver 44. Amari Cooper is wide receiver 45. This is just what happens to older players in Dynasty. The entire reason they're valued so high is because of their production. But once you remove that production, they're very quickly no longer valuable in Dynasty because of their age. And I think that's what everybody else is catching up to on Tyreek Hill. Even if he returns to elite production to end the year, he is still going to be a 31-year-old wide receiver next year on the precipice of retirement. And then the last two guys in Terry McLaurin and DJ Moore are just more productive guys, or at least Terry McLaurin is right now. DJ Moore has actually killed teams this year. He's been absolutely awful every single week, minus that one Carolina Panthers revenge game. He might actually be the most overrated wide receiver in all of Dynasty right now, based on where his value is and where his production has been this year. I was shocked to see how bad his production has actually been. I was tempted to put him lower on this list, but his past production and being tied to an improving Caleb Williams makes me hold him here still in the top 30. Oh, and Terry McLaurin has also been great. It's been very fun to watch. He is the better older wide receiver attached to a rookie quarterback this year. So there we have it, an updated top 30 Dynasty wide receiver rankings now that we're a little over halfway through the 2024 season. Make sure to drop any and all questions in the comments down below. Continue to call me an idiot if you want to, but make sure that you're subscribed either way for more Dynasty content for the rest of 2024 and into 2025.